The night sky has always been a source of wonder. Every evening, as darkness envelopes the earth, the moon rises, a steady presence in the heavens. It's a celestial companion, a guiding light in the vast, inky expanse. From ancient myths to modern science, the moon has held a place of reverence and importance. It controls the tides, stabilizes the Earth's axis, and provides light in the darkness. But imagine, one night, the moon simply vanishing. No warning, no explanation, just gone. The familiar glow that has watched over us for eons is now a void in the sky. At first, the change is subtle. People don't immediately realize what's missing. The sky feels emptier, but the world continues as usual until the first waves of panic start to spread. People gaze upward, puzzled. The stars seem less bright without the moon's radiance. There's an eerie stillness in the air, as if the planet itself is holding its breath. The disappearance of the moon might seem like a mystery, but soon the consequences of this cosmic anomaly start to become clear. The Earth is no longer in perfect balance. In the days that follow, the world begins to change in ways no one anticipated. Tides begin to behave unpredictably. Without the moon's gravitational pull, the oceans become restless, rising and falling erratically. Scientists scramble to understand what's happening. The moon's absence is not just a strange phenomenon. It's a global crisis in the making. The world holds its collective breath, fearing the unknown. The disappearance of the moon was not a sudden event in the sense that it happened instantaneously. The first signs were subtle. A few hours after the usual twilight, people began to notice something wasn't quite right. The moon wasn't rising as it always did. People looked to the sky, puzzled, thinking it was just a temporary anomaly. But as the minutes ticked by and the moon failed to show, unease began to creep in. Streets grew quieter, and eyes turned upward with suspicion. Soon after, news outlets began broadcasting reports. Some suggested it was a technical malfunction, a mistake in astronomical data. But the absence persisted. Scientists scrambled to offer explanations, but none seemed adequate. People began to gather outside, staring at the sky, searching for something to make sense of the growing emptiness. The world had become noticeably quieter, as if nature itself had paused. Without the moon's glow, the stars looked dimmer, and the familiar landscape felt altered. The night no longer held its comforting rhythm. Tension and anxiety grew as the evening wore on. As the clock struck midnight, the realization began to settle in. The moon was gone, and there was no explanation for its disappearance. It was as though a once solid presence in the universe had simply vanished. As the hours passed, the first signs of real disruption started to unfold. Without the moon's gravitational pull, the Earth's tides began to fluctuate in unpredictable patterns. Coastal towns, which had always been in sync with the ebb and flow of the tides, started to notice strange changes. High tides came and went erratically, catching fishermen and swimmers off guard. At the same time, other areas saw the water receding too far, exposing the ocean floor in places that had always been submerged. Authorities issued immediate warnings to coastal regions. The phenomenon was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Marine life, thrown into confusion, began to show signs of distress. Fish that normally swam in certain depths began surfacing unexpectedly, while others moved to different parts of the oceans. News outlets flashed updates. Unprecedented tidal behavior continues in coastal regions. This disruption wasn't limited to the oceans alone. Weather patterns were also shifting. Without the stabilizing influence of the moon, the Earth's axis was more vulnerable. Unusual wind patterns began to emerge, and atmospheric pressure changed. Forecasters struggled to predict even short-term weather patterns. People spoke in hushed tones about the moon's absence, some even speculating that it was the end of something bigger, something they couldn't fully understand. The world was beginning to realize that the loss of the moon was not just a temporary anomaly. It was a profound crisis. Scientists were quick to react, calling emergency meetings to discuss the moon's disappearance. Theories began to emerge. Some speculated that the moon had somehow been displaced from its orbit. Others suggested a cosmic event had altered its course. There was talk of a sudden shift in the gravitational forces of the universe, but no one had any solid answers. A sense of urgency pervaded the scientific community, and scientists began to warn of possible long-term consequences. What was certain was that the loss of the moon was affecting the Earth in ways they hadn't predicted. The Earth's axial tilt, which had been stable for millions of years, was now vulnerable. Without the moon's stabilizing effect, the planet could experience more extreme weather patterns in the future. Seasons might become erratic, and temperatures could fluctuate in ways that were impossible to foresee. Some researchers feared that the Earth itself was entering a dangerous period of instability. Governments worldwide started to take action. Emergency response teams were put on high alert. Experts from various fields, astronomy, geology, meteorology, came together to study the phenomenon. The public, however, was growing increasingly restless. Every new report added to the fear and uncertainty. It wasn't just the moon that was gone. It felt like the entire universe had shifted, leaving humanity unsure of what might come next. As the world grappled with the disappearance of the moon, the economic consequences began to make themselves known. Markets across the globe were in turmoil. The uncertainty caused by the moon's sudden absence led to panic among investors. Stock markets plummeted as the value of currencies fluctuated wildly. No one knew how to prepare for a world without the moon, and governments were scrambling to stabilize their economies. The agricultural industry was particularly hard hit. Farmers who relied on the moon's gravitational influence for planting and harvesting schedules faced unpredictable crop yields. Tidal changes were affecting fishing industries, and the ocean's ecosystems seemed to be in disarray. Those who had prepared for seasonal changes were now facing the unpredictability of the tides and weather. Meanwhile, major cities were affected by rolling blackouts. Power grids, designed with the assumption of stable environmental conditions, began to experience overloads. Without the moon's influence, the Earth's environmental systems were undergoing shifts that no one had anticipated. Emergency measures were taken to prevent more widespread chaos. In the midst of it all, people were wondering, how long would this last? Would the world be able to survive without the moon? Despite the chaos, human resilience shone through. Communities began to come together, sharing resources and trying to adapt. But the question remained, how long could they hold on before the world was irreversibly changed? As the days turned into weeks, the fears within the scientific community deepened. Despite their best efforts to find an explanation, the disappearance of the moon remained a mystery. Some began to consider the possibility that the moon had been deliberately removed by an advanced extraterrestrial force, though the idea was dismissed as speculation. However, this new theory began to gain traction among certain groups, sparking widespread conspiracy theories. In response, the global scientific community intensified their efforts. Telescopes were aimed at space, and probes were sent in every direction to search for clues. Yet there was nothing. It was as if the moon had never existed at all. No traces were left behind, and the night sky remained empty. The most alarming part of this mystery was the fact that the Earth itself was being affected in real time. The loss of the moon's gravitational pull was starting to take a more serious toll on the planet. The Earth's rotation had begun to slow, causing days and nights to stretch longer. This anomaly led to concerns about the impact on ecosystems, wildlife, and human life. Without the moon, Earth's gravitational balance was compromised, and no one knew how long the planet could sustain itself under these conditions. As time passed, the effects of the moon's disappearance began to take a subtle yet significant toll on humanity. People were experiencing strange phenomena, with many feeling an underlying sense of unease. Sleep patterns were the first to be affected, as humans began to struggle without the moon's calming influence on the body's circadian rhythms. Insomnia became widespread, and people complained of disturbed sleep, waking in the middle of the night, unable to fall back asleep. The disruptions didn't stop there. Mental health was taking a hit as well. People were more anxious, more prone to depression, and the general sense of unease permeated everyday life. Social relationships began to fray, as the constant stress of living in an uncertain world weighed heavily on individuals. People became increasingly isolated, retreating into their homes, unsure of what the future held. Children were especially affected. Without the moon's guiding presence, even their most basic routines seemed disrupted. Daylight didn't seem to last as long, and the nights were uncomfortably dark. Many parents began to feel the weight of raising their children in this new, unpredictable world. The moon had always been a stable force in the lives of children, a symbol of continuity and safety. Now, its absence had introduced a sense of fragility to their young minds. As the weeks turned into months, the absence of the moon started to cause severe disruptions in Earth's environment. The tides had become unpredictable, causing coastal flooding in places that had never experienced it before. Beaches that were once safe havens for swimmers were now submerged by unusually high tides, and the power of the oceans had become erratic, with tsunamis occurring without warning. Weather patterns also began to shift. The Earth's tilt, affected by the moon's gravitational pull, began to show its influence. Unseasonable storms and extreme temperatures became more frequent. In some regions, intense heat waves scorched the land, while others faced unseasonably cold winters. The world was experiencing a kind of environmental whiplash, caught between extremes, unsure of what to expect next. In addition to the weather disruptions, wildlife was suffering. Animals that had once relied on the moon to guide them through migration patterns were now lost. Birds flew in strange directions, and sea creatures washed ashore in unusual locations, unable to navigate the waters. The ecological balance that had taken centuries to establish was quickly unraveling. It seemed as if the Earth itself was being thrown off course. The once predictable cycles of nature, carefully orchestrated by the moon, had been shattered, leaving the world to face an uncertain and increasingly chaotic future. With the environment in disarray, humanity was now facing a global panic. Governments scrambled to provide answers, but there were none. The scientific community was at a loss, unable to explain the full extent of the moon's disappearance and how to restore balance to the world. The realization that the moon might be gone for good began to sink in, and fear started to spread. Social unrest reached an all-time high. People, feeling as though their survival was at stake, began to fight over scarce resources. Major cities were locked in chaos as shortages of food, water, and basic supplies triggered violent riots. People were hoarding anything they could get their hands on, and stores were emptied in a matter of hours. The sense of normalcy that had once defined daily life was replaced by a desperate struggle for survival. Even more disturbing was the sudden breakdown of communication systems. News outlets began reporting that the loss of the moon had disrupted satellite systems, causing a communication blackout across many regions. With no way to reach loved ones and no clear information about what was happening, the panic only intensified. People were left in the dark, unsure of where to turn or who to trust. As the weeks passed, it became clear that humanity's grip on control was slipping. What had once been a world built on order and stability now seemed to be teetering on the edge of collapse. The future, once bright, was now uncertain. As months turned into years, humanity had come to accept the unthinkable reality. The moon was gone, and the world had irrevocably changed. The scientific community's attempts to restore it had failed, and the technological solutions once hoped for seemed out of reach. Despite this, a new era of human resilience began to emerge. People started to adapt to their new world, finding ways to cope with the darkness and disarray that had once seemed impossible to endure. Though many still faced hardships, life slowly began to find a new rhythm. Society learned to thrive without the comforting presence of the moon, finding solace in the stars above. New technologies were created to help humans navigate the nights, and people found new ways to keep time, adjusting to a world that no longer followed the familiar patterns. For some, the absence of the moon marked the beginning of a new chapter in human evolution. It became clear that humanity could endure the most unimaginable challenges and rise above them. As the years passed, people found ways to coexist with their transformed planet. In the absence of the moon, humanity forged new dreams, new hopes, and new futures, slowly accepting that the end of one chapter was simply the beginning of another. The moon may have disappeared, but humanity's ability to persevere was stronger than ever.